Hello and welcome to my world. I am pleased to announce that finally the chassis for this Clodbuster project is all done. And as you can see here, it went together pretty well. I'm very happy with it, and everything turned out the way I had planned many months ago when I first started this project. So in this video I'll be talking about some of the parts that I used and just a little overview of the laundry list of different aftermarket parts that I used to build this chassis. And also, between my last video and this video, I did run into a little bit of another problem that I had to fix, so I'll discuss that problem and how I fixed it later on towards the end of this video. So let's just start out. This truck chassis is a CPE, or Crawford Performance Engineering time warp chassis. And I'll go through the parts that went into it. So starting up here on top, this is a Novak NER 2X 2-channel receiver. And this is a Novak ESC brushless cooling fan with a generic steel grill cover that I bought for a regular computer fan bolted on top. And underneath there, that is a good old trusty Novak Super Rooster speed controller. Absolutely love those. And incidentally, I just bought 2 brand new ones still in their sealed packaging just the other day. So I absolutely love this speed controller for monster trucks, and it's the only speed controller that I use on all of my Clodbusters and bullheads. All of these, and oh, here's the battery pack mounted here on top. All of these electronic components are mounted to the aluminum custom electronics plate that I made, and I made a separate video for that, so I designed that and had it manufactured by a machine shop. Also, on the front portion of the chassis side plate right here, this is the adjustment pot for the rear steering servo trim. So there was no place to mount that anywhere else, and it was not flat enough to be mounted onto the electronics plate right here with double-sided servo tape. So what I did was I took that PC board with the adjustment pot on it, and I mounted it to the inner surface of the chassis side plate, and I secured it with just good old-fashioned simple zip ties. And that was easy to do because the time warp chassis has all these holes for mounting shock absorbers in a whole bunch of different positions here. So I was able to put the zip ties through there without having to drill any extra holes in the side plate. And I just secured the PC board with the adjustment pot right here on the inside of the side plate. So I can now make adjustments to the rear steering servos trim. Just easily just remove the body and just use a screwdriver, and I can adjust it right there. And working our way down here, one thing to note too about the time warp chassis is that you can mount this upper electronics plate, which on the original non-modified electronics plate just holds the battery pack, but you can mount it in one of 2 different positions. So I have it mounted here with these 2 screws here in the lower position, but you can also mount it a little bit higher right here in those holes right there. Working our way down here, the shocks are from OC Racing, and I bought those because they have this cool red color. This truck will have a red and black color scheme eventually when I get the body finished. And those are mounted to a Crawford quad shock mount kit, and that was one of the issues that I had with the truck recently that just popped up that I had to fix. So I'll talk about those changes later that I mentioned, but they all had to do basically with the shock absorbers and mounting those. Down here is one of the 2 Team Brood Racing motors, 27-turn single modified motors with an eBay red anodized aluminum heatsink clip to it. Back here are the Stormer Hobbies 4-to-1 gear reduction units, and those are attached to Hess Machine aluminum gear cases axle tubes, and steering knuckles. And connected to those steering knuckles are aluminum steering links. Those are made by Crawford. And the servo is a high-tech HS645MG servo, and that is mounted to Pargu aluminum bumpers with integrated servo mounts. All of the wiring is Dean's wet noodle 12 gauge wire with Dean's ultra plugs, and I only use the real Dean's ultra plugs. These are not the generic T plugs that are so prevalent all over the internet today. These are the real deals. These are aluminum ladder bars made by Pargu, and kind of hard to see, but down here those are aluminum chassis stabilizers that I got off of eBay, made by Cosmos Creation is the name of the company. Incidentally, going back to the top here, also these chassis braces, both rear and on the front, those are made by Cosmos Creation, and I didn't really need those chassis braces for the Time Warp chassis. Those aluminum parts are mainly made for the stock plastic Tamiya tub chassis, but I had them laying around in my spare parts box, so I decided to just put them on there. These aluminum body posts were also made by Pargu, both the ones on the rear and also these longer ones here that are on the front. And the tires are IMX Clod Swamp Dogs with JPS plain style wheels. And the front gear case and the front gear case and axle assembly, it's all basically the same. It does all the same parts. Inside the gear cases are stock plastic Tamiya gears, with the exception of the pinion gears. Pinions are steel 0.8 mod Tamiya pinion gears, and the axle shafts are the stock Tamiya ones, and the stub axles also are the stock Tamiya ones. The pinion gears right here that are on the directly mounted to the Team Brood Racing motors that are in the Stormer gear reduction units, those are 12 to 32 pitch hardened steel pinion gears from Robinson Racing. Now everything went together pretty well, except for trying to get the tires to fit onto the chassis without rubbing. So on my last video where I showed the chassis being put together, I did not have the tires and wheels mounted. So as soon as I got those put on, after I finished filming that video, I took the chassis for a little test drive in my living room for a few minutes, and that's when I realized that the negative offset of the JPS wheels was not quite enough to prevent the big huge IMX tires from rubbing on the shock absorbers. So that all started because the thickness of the Stormer Hobbies gear reduction unit right here, that added thickness pushed the motors closer to the shock absorbers. So I remember when I did my first video of assembling the chassis, I showed how I had put these 6mm aluminum spacers right here between the Crawford quad shock mount and the Pargu aluminum ladder bar right there. So I thought that additional 6-inch spacer right there would be enough to move the shock absorbers far enough away from the motor end bell, but they were not quite enough. So what I did was, on the fourth shock absorber right here, hopefully you can see that in there, I put an additional, right there, an additional 4mm aluminum spacer right there, just on this fourth shock, to space it enough to give enough clearance away from the motor end bell right here. So there's just enough room between the end bell right there and the shock spring and the lower spring cup right there just barely enough room for it. So now there's plenty of room for that. But the problem was that because that fourth shock was pushed so much closer to the tire sidewall, that the sidewall was rubbing on the side of the shock absorber right here, and also the shock absorber's mounting screw right there, whenever the tires turned. So one of the things I love about JPS wheels is that they have a lot of negative offset, more so than the stock type of Tamiya wheels, Clawbuster and bullhead wheels. So even I thought that would be enough room right in here for just the JPS wheels, because they have all that negative offset. They push the wheel sidewall away from the shock center. I thought that'd be enough room, but it just wasn't quite enough. I could steer the wheels a little bit to the left and to the right, but I could not go full lock-to-lock steering without rubbing and chewing up the inner sidewall of the tire right here, because it was rubbing right here on the side of the shock absorber and on that mounting screw down there. So not quite enough room there. So what I did was I bought some aluminum wheel spacers. Most manufacturers call them wheel wideners, and that's not really true. They don't widen the wheel. What they do is they widen the front and rear track of the axles. So they increase your track width. And if you look in here, you can see that aluminum spacer right there. It's that little cylindrical shaped part that goes between the wheel and the steering knuckle right there. So these are 15 millimeter wide ones, so they increase the track width overall of a stock Clodbuster. They increase the track width by 30 millimeters. So 15 millimeters on one tire, and then 15 millimeters of width added to the other tire. And that allowed enough room for me to make a full lock-to-lock steering of both the front and the rear. So to give you an idea how much extra space those wideners add, on a regular non-modified JPS aluminum wheel, the edge of the inner edge of the tire rim right there, that edge is about located about over the top of the steering kingpin pivot point. So if I did not have the spacers in there, that inner edge, inner of the rim right there, would be right over the center of that kingpin, right there where my pointer is right there. So you can see right now, the edge is positioned quite a bit away from the center of the kingpin right there. So approximately 15 millimeters of distance there, and that's what's required to provide ample clearance between the inner tire sidewall right here and that fourth shock absorber right there. So it rubbed pretty bad as soon as I started steering to the left or the right just a little bit. So I could have avoided this completely by simply not turning my truck and have it go straight, but what fun would that be, right? Got to turn. So, of course, all of this also could be prevented completely, and this is a good example of if you're new to building custom Clodbusters or custom bullheads from scratch with all custom parts like this. If you've never done this before, one of the things to keep in mind is that, as I said earlier in some of my previous videos, that not only are aftermarket parts from one company not necessarily compatible with aftermarket parts from a different company. Also, you have to keep in mind that when you put aftermarket parts on your truck, there can be a daisy chain of effects that kind of snowball, and those parts will affect other parts, and then will affect other parts, and so forth and so on. And that's me putting these spacers on here to prevent the sidewalls from rubbing on the shocks. That is the end result of so many, a huge daisy chain and huge snowball effect of different changes that I made to the truck. So let me go through those right now. And the main problem for this is that the Hess machine gear cases, they do not allow you to use a pinion gear smaller than the stock size 13-tooth one. And there's no way I could use a 13-tooth pinion gear on this truck because the IMX Swamp Dog tires are so much larger in diameter compared to the stock Tamiya tires. And this is true with full-scale 4x4 trucks too. If you're going to increase your tire size, and if you know my videos, you know how I feel. You always got to go bigger in tires. You're not going to go smaller. But with full-size trucks, if you increase the size of your tires, you have to change the gear ratio to compensate. You have to gear it down. And Clodbusters are no different. If you put bigger tires on them like these are significantly larger than the stock Tamiya tires, you have to change the gearing on your pinion gear to compensate for that. But unfortunately, the Hess machine gear cases do not allow for a pinion gear smaller than 13 teeth. That's the stock size one. So, the only way for me to gear down this truck was to put on the Stormer Racing gear reduction units. So those, because of their 4-to-1 gear ratio change, so that allows me to have enough power to rotate these huge tires. Well, the disadvantage of those is that because of their thickness, the gear reduction units force this motor end bell to come closer to the shock absorbers. So now, of course, I could totally avoid this problem if I either kept the stock size tires, and I didn't want to do that with this truck. That was out of the question. So I had to change my gear ratios down. So I had to use some kind of bolt-on exterior gear reduction unit like these, and that caused the motor to be moved further out. Now, of course, I could avoid all that also by simply just only using 2 shock absorbers on each wheel, like the stock Tamiya suspension system has on it. But this being more of a show truck than a performance truck, what fun would that be, right? Gotta have more shocks, the better. That's the way show trucks were done in the 1980s. So I did not want to use smaller tires. I did not want to use fewer than 4 shock absorbers per wheel. So that's why this 4th shock absorber is way over here in front of the motor end bell. So to compensate for all that, I had to move the shock absorber out like that, and thus, in order to prevent interference with the sidewall, I had to use the spacers on the wheels, the wideners on there. So it's kind of a daisy chain of effects. All of this could be avoided simply, in a nutshell, if I left my truck stock. And if you want to avoid hassles like this and avoid late nights, staying awake, thinking about how to fix problems like this, then definitely leave your Clodbuster or your Bullhead completely stock. There is no simpler way to build an RC monster truck than by simply following the instructions and putting it together and keeping it totally stock. I'll be honest with you. I've built quite a few of these all from the ground up custom trucks, and yeah, if you want to avoid sleepless nights thinking about this sort of stuff, just leave your truck stock. But now what fun would that be, right? Modifying these monster trucks and making them completely unique and putting our own custom touches to them is what makes this hobby so much fun, in my opinion, anyway. So, but if you've never done this before, that's one of the things you just have to keep in mind. These modifications can pile up on top of each other and interfere with one another and cause a snowball effect of changes. So just be ready for that and don't be surprised. It's totally normal. It's nothing unusual. But one of the other side effects of putting all those spacers in the shock absorber mount, the quad shock mount right here, and moving the shock absorbers out is that caused the chassis to have what they call tweak. At least I've heard it called that. And that is where one of the tires on one end of the axle would droop down further. It was the one here on the left. That tire would droop down further than the one on the right where all the spacers are. And that, plus the same effect happening on the front axle over here, resulted in the axles, the front and rear axles, not being parallel to one another when viewing them from the front or the back when looking right at them. And that caused the 4 contact patches of the tires to not be coplanar. So when the truck, let's say it was flying in the air and then jumping down, all 4 tires on a flat surface with the chassis parallel to the ground, all 4 tires would not touch the ground at the same time. One of the tires on each axle would be lower, closer to the ground, than the other. And that's a big no-no with not just monster trucks, but all kinds of cars and trucks and buggies, stadium trucks, touring cars. It doesn't matter. No matter the vehicle in RC, and also full-scale cars too, you want the extended suspensions to be the same on all 4 corners of the vehicle so that all 4 tires, their contact patches are coplanar, so that we have equal contact pressure on each tire. And that was not happening because all the spacers were located down here, just on the motor side of the axles. And so to prevent that and to even everything up, I used some 6mm aluminum spacers that I also had right here. And just spaced them on this side too. So now I also have the 6mm aluminum spacers on this side, the non-motor side of each axle too, on the front and rear axles. So now the chassis is all even and all 4 tires touch a flat surface at the same time, and they have the contact patches for all 4 tires. All 4 contact patches are now coplanar the way it should be. So one other just little change that I made at the last minute. But everything worked out okay in the end. It took a long time to get to this point. Had to make a lot of last minute changes that I did not see coming up, including those wheel spacers. And actually, this is the first time I've ever, speaking of wheel spacers, this is the first time I've ever used those wheel wideners or wheel spacers. And I'm not a huge fan of using those, either on Clodbusters or even on full-scale cars. Full-scale cars, same thing. When you put those wheel spacers in there, you add all kinds of different loads to the suspension system. It can cause all kinds of alignment issues, and you can wear out ball bearings and also suspension ball joints on full-scale cars if you use too many of those spacers. So you add all kinds of weird stuff. And the same kind of stuff happens with Clodbusters too. If you use those spacers, you put a lot of excess load on the stub axles. And I have, through the years, I've bent several of the stock Tamiya stub axles on Clodbusters just with using non-negative offset wheels, just using the stock plastic wheels with the stock offset on them, no wideners. And I have bent a few, not a lot, just maybe 2 or 3 sets of those stock stub axles. And when you have the JPS wheels with a lot of negative offset already, they put more load on those stub axles, especially when you jump your truck and it lands on the ground. And then you add these extra 15mm wideners or spacers to them, you add a lot more leverage onto those stock stub axles. So the chance of bending them is increased quite a bit. And with this truck too, because it has the larger diameter tires, that's even more load on those little stub axles. But this is a truck that I do not plan on jumping or flying through the air or anything like that. It's not a high-speed truck. It's very slow, especially with those Stormer Hobbies gear reduction units on it. So I think these axles will be fine, but it's just something to keep in mind if you plan on doing this with the JPS wheels or any other aftermarket wheels that have a lot of negative offset. I would not advise putting these 15mm wheel spacers or wheel wideners back there behind them, because it just puts a lot of stress on the stub axles. Now, you can avoid that too if you use the RC 4-wheel drive or ThunderTech Racing CVD axle shafts for Clodbusters that are actually made by MIP. Those are larger in diameter, so they can handle more load. They won't bend as easily, but just if you use these wheel wideners, just keep that in mind. You are putting more load on all those parts. And if I swing around here so you see the front view, you can see how much wider this truck is now because of those wideners. And the yoke ends of the axles and the kingpins, they're all now way out here in the wide open. You can see them real easily. Normally on Clodbusters you can't see those ends of the axle tubes sticking out like that. So this truck, it does look quite a bit wider than a stock Clodbuster now, but that's basically what I had to do in order to prevent the tire sidewalls from rubbing on anything. So that is the chassis, all complete and done and ready to go. This truck is almost complete. All that's I have left to do now is just finish up the body and then mount that on top. So that's my next on my to-do list. But the chassis here is completely done as far as I know, unless there's some more changes, and it's inevitable. These custom projects always have something that pops up and changes inevitably have to be made. So I suppose this truck, just like all my other ones, will never be completely done, but it's 99.99% done, and I'm very happy with it, the way it turned out. And in the next video, I'll show what the body looks like, and that shouldn't take too long. I don't see any unexpected problems with just simply putting stickers on the body and putting on all the custom aluminum bumpers and hood scoops and roll bars and stuff like that on the truck, so that should be pretty smooth sailing. I don't see any unexpected bumps in the road for the body. But I'll show the body in my next video, so please stay tuned for that. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions about all this, any of these changes that I made, or questions, or if you have any comments about it, please let me know. I read all the comments in my video, so please feel free to leave any comments or questions below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next video.